the justice system is not about justice anymore. It's about a conviction rate. Whatever numbers the prosecutors can get, that's what we're paying them for.
Welcome to Wickedly Judged, where we uncover the hidden flaws and shocking injustices in the legal system. I'm your host, Rebecca, and every week we'll dive deep into the stories of those wrongfully convicted, overlooked, or betrayed by a system designed to protect them. These aren't just tales of courtroom drama. They're real lives forever altered by corruption, bias, and human error. Together, we'll unravel the truth, challenge what we think we know, and ask the hard questions. How does this happen? Who's responsible? And what can be done for the wickedly judged? If you're ready to explore the darker side of justice, you've found your place. Let's begin. Today, we continue our deep dive into the case of Johnny Watkins, a man convicted of a crime he says he didn't commit. In our last episode, we explored the crime that led to Johnny's arrest and the questionable circumstances surrounding it. Today, we step into the courtroom, where the system failed him in ways that are both shocking and sadly all too common. This is the trial of Johnny Watkins, a trial that relied not on hard evidence, but on the words of three young boys, all of whom had reasons to tell a story the prosecution wanted to hear. A trial built on shaky witness testimony. A trial where no physical evidence connected Johnny to the crime. A trial where the defense was outmatched and the prosecution controlled the narrative. This is the trial of Johnny Watkins, a case study in wrongful convictions and the system that makes them possible. The state of Ohio versus Johnny Watkins. Imagine the scene. A packed courtroom, reporters in the gallery, sketch artists capturing every expression. Johnny Watkins sits at the defense table in a stiff suit, his eyes scanning the jury, searching for any sign of fairness. Across from him, the prosecution is confident. They have their story set, their witnesses prepped, and they know how this will play out. The judge enters, the jury is sworn in, and the trial begins. The prosecution built its case around witness testimony, specifically the accounts of three boys, ages 16, 18, and 19. These boys told the court that they saw Johnny at the scene, but their stories weren't consistent. Their initial statements to police were vague. They didn't see much, or they came up with elaborate stories as to what really happened. They weren't sure who really did it. But after being questioned by the investigators, their memories seemed to improve. But the truth of the matter is, after being told, just don't tell us you did it, and you're going home by the detectives, their stories became crystal clear. When witnesses are young, their memories are even more vulnerable to suggestion. Studies show that children and teens, when repeatedly questioned, often begin to believe false memories. Let's not forget the pressure these boys faced. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they thought they were doing the right thing. Or maybe they just wanted the questioning to stop. Whatever the case may be, their words cost Johnny his freedom. To understand what happened with these boys, we need to talk about false memory. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, a leading expert on memory, has shown that our recollections are not perfect recordings of the past. They're reconstructions, easily influenced by outside information. And when minors are questioned repeatedly, especially by authority figures, something dangerous happens. They start to believe the story being fed to them. I spoke with Brian Leslie, an expert in coercive interrogations. He has worked on a lot of wrongful conviction cases. Here's what he had to say about how young witnesses are manipulated. Children and teenagers are especially susceptible to suggestion. When you repeatedly ask them the same question, they start to doubt their own memories. And if a police officer implies they should remember something, they often fill in the gaps with details they think are expected. And that's exactly what happened here. At first, these boys weren't sure, but by the time of trial, they were absolutely convinced because their memories had been shaped by the pressure that was put on them. Let me start with Billy's interrogation. As I said in the previous episode, the first minute of his interrogation, the detectives are saying, "We've been at this for 25 minutes. Just tell us what we want to hear." And there is 24 minutes of recording that's missing. Billy also says during that interrogation that, "I'm just trying to tell you what I saw happen." There wasn't much that he could see. He was sitting by a campfire, 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. There was a full moon, or mostly full moon, but it was dark. And if you've ever been to a campfire before and you've sat around the fire, you realize that everything on the other side of the fire from where you're sitting is completely black. You can't see anything. It's almost like you're blind because the fire creates a fire blindness. So what could he really tell them about what happened except for who got up first and who followed? That's the extent of the testimony that he should have had. Now, in Caleb's interrogation, he goes on to talk about Italian mobsters and hitmen and all kinds of outlandish, crazy things, and then circles back around to say, what's going to happen to me when I go to court? How much time am I facing? Does what I did make me a murderer? Now, in his first initial statement, he was over 100 feet away using the bathroom. Now, 100 feet in the dark on the side of the fire where you can't see anything past the fire, but yet he saw beyond a shadow of a doubt what happened. So, was he really 100 feet away? Was he 50 feet, as he said? Or, as he later testifies, 15 feet? Those are some big differences in numbers. Now, if you go by Johnny's account and also Jake's account as to what happened, Caleb was right beside Johnny with the knife in his hand when Johnny hit Steve in the back of the head with the log. But Caleb testifies under oath that Johnny had his hand wrapped around Caleb's hand and the knife was in Caleb's hand, and Johnny drug him over 50 feet, kicking and screaming, to force him to stab Steve. Why? Everybody else's account was that Caleb was right beside him. So why did Caleb lie under oath? And why wasn't he charged with perjury? Now remember, Jake testified during the pretrial that the knife was in Caleb's hand. He pulled it out of his pocket. Johnny never had the knife. Johnny never touched the knife. When we get to the trial, Jake's story changes. Now all of a sudden, Johnny had the knife. So why did his story change? What was he promised in exchange for saying under oath what the detectives and the prosecutor wanted him to say? Why wasn't he charged? At the very least for assault for getting into a fight with Steve. Why wasn't Caleb charged? He was the one that had the knife in his hand. He even admitted to that. So why wasn't he charged? What was he promised as well from the prosecutor? And Billy, we all remember, he was threatened with 15 to life, and his cellie making him feel real good for the rest of his life. So why is it that the prosecutor and the detectives did everything they could to pin this on Johnny with no evidence whatsoever? There was no physical evidence, no murder weapon, no fingerprints, no blood, no DNA, no forensics. So how in the world did the jury come back with a guilty verdict? What is it that they saw in this trial that would make them find him guilty? Maybe I should ask this question a different way. What was left out of the trial that would have proven Johnny's innocence? When somebody is charged with a crime and they are sent to trial, there's a thing called discovery, where the prosecution has to turn over all of the evidence to the defense team so that they can build their case for their client. Well, the prosecutor in this case decided that he wasn't going to turn over all of the evidence. He buried the boys' written statements. He buried their interrogation tapes. Those two key pieces of evidence would have been enough to prove Johnny's innocence. Now here's the point in the trial where we say that the defense team tried to push back, that they tried to point out the inconsistencies in the boys' statements. However, Johnny's defense attorney didn't do that. He was more concerned about whether or not he was going to still be able to practice law, whether he was going to have his license suspended. He wasn't caring about the fact that an innocent man was getting ready to go to prison for a crime he didn't commit. He didn't care about the fact that they were talking the death penalty. In fact, his attorney didn't even listen to him and was trying to present a case of self-defense. Johnny told him that he didn't want to pursue that, but the defense attorney didn't listen to him at all. He never called any witnesses on Johnny's behalf. He refused to let Johnny testify on his own behalf. Wouldn't call his mother to the stand, none of his friends, nothing. In reading through the trial transcripts, I can say that the defense attorney did point out a few inconsistencies once the judge ordered the prosecutor to let the defense attorney read the boy's statement for 5 minutes. All the time he was given to build a case was 5 minutes because the prosecutor didn't want to come off of those statements. He didn't want the defense team to have them at all. He didn't feel that it was necessary. But yet those statements would have been exactly what Johnny needed to exonerate him, to prove his innocence. And the prosecutor wanted to make sure that that never happened. As we all know, most public defenders have so many cases that they're literally drowning. They're paid a certain amount of money no matter how much time is spent on each case. It's a flat fee, that's it. So they don't have the care or the time to really put into defending anybody. They just go along with whatever the prosecutor says, and they may throw up a few objections or whatever, but they don't really take the time to look into the case, to do the research that's needed to prove innocence. Now, let's talk about the jury. 12 people. None of them knew Johnny. Most of them had already heard about the case from local news. The coverage? Definitely not in Johnny's favor. Before the trial even started, Johnny was already labeled as the likely suspect, and jury selection didn't help. The prosecution used a controversial tactic called preemptory strikes, removing potential jurors without having to give a reason. And who did they strike? Every single juror who might have been sympathetic to Johnny. What was left? A mostly middle-aged, mostly conservative jury, People who, historically, more likely to trust the word of the police and prosecutors. In cases like Johnny's, jury selection can make or break a trial. And here, it broke him. They saw 3 boys on the stand, nervous, uncertain, but ultimately saying the same name, Johnny Watkins. So he must have been guilty, right? And that was enough to convict him. Time and again, the defense's attempts to introduce doubt were shut down. The judge sided with the prosecution on key motions, including when the prosecutor was wanting to impeach his own witnesses. The judge threw out some ridiculous rules as to how a witness can be impeached. The prosecutor was literally telling the judge, these boys are lying on the stand. And that's when the defense asked to see the written statements. And then the prosecutor refuses to give them. So how can he say that, hey, my witnesses are lying on the stand, but I'm not going to show you any proof that they're lying, and the judge does not impeach the witnesses? Now, mind you, all this was done on a sidebar, so the jury knew nothing about it. They didn't hear it. They weren't able to tell what was going on. They just knew that the defense attorney, the prosecutor, and the judge were having a conversation. Now, had the jury known that the prosecutor was trying to impeach his own witnesses, the outcome of the trial would have been very different, because that would have raised reasonable doubt. After just a few short days of testimony, it was time for the jury to decide Johnny's fate. 12 people, no physical evidence, no murder weapon, no DNA, no forensics, just words, shaky, contradictory, and, as we know, unreliable. They didn't deliberate for very long, just a couple of hours. When they returned to the courtroom, everyone was silent. After the jury is seated, you hear the judge tell Johnny to stand. The jury foreperson comes back with, "We find the defendant guilty." The only good part about this was they didn't find him guilty of aggravated murder, which was a death penalty. They found him guilty of murder, which is an automatic 15 to life. His mother cried. Johnny himself was stunned. He had always believed in the justice system until it turned against him. His family couldn't believe that he was found guilty. So why in the world did the jury find him guilty? Again, it's because of the fact that they did not hear the sidebar about impeaching the witnesses. They didn't have the written statements from the boys in front of them when they were shown the evidence. So how were they to know that they were lying on the stand? They couldn't. So what happened? How did a man with no physical evidence against him end up convicted? A life sentence. No second chances. Johnny, frozen in shock, could barely breathe. And the system moved on like it always does. So let's recap. This case was built on unreliable, inconsistent statements. The jury was selected in a way that favored conviction. The defense was denied key evidence that would have proved his innocence. This wasn't just a trial, it was a script, and Johnny Watkins was cast in the role of the guilty man before it even started. Johnny's trial may be over, but his fight isn't. In our next episode, we'll explore his appeals, the new evidence that emerged, the legal hurdles he faced, and the long road towards justice. If you believe cases like Johnny's need to be heard, subscribe to Wickedly Judged and share this episode. If you or someone you know has been wrongfully convicted, send us an email at wickedlyjudged@gmail.com. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and always question the system. If you know of someone who's been wrongfully convicted and would like your story to be told, please reach out to us at wickedlyjudged@gmail.com. Together, we can fight the corrupt system and bring about much needed change to save other people from being wrongfully convicted and wickedly judged. If you would like to sponsor an episode of Wickedly Judged, reach out to us at wickedlyjudged@gmail.com. Together, we can bring about change.